Hello and welcome to our presentation. A board is the governing body of a company. It sets strategy and oversees management. Furthermore, it's also the primary influence on corporate governance in those companies. When looking at the composition of boards, we mostly see a lot of men in there. According to the OECD, in 2020, there were on average 16% women on boards and across the biggest 500 companies in the world. To increase the amount of women in boards, in 2008, a law in Norway was passed. For public companies, they were obliged to have at least 40% women in their boards. Today, we will look at arguments for and against such legislation, and we will compare two continents as well.
So Norway was the first country to introduce a quota for women on company boards. This resulted into a Europe-wide debate about quotas and women in leading positions. Now in 2022, European Parliament and EU countries finally agreed on the Women Board Directive, which is that by 2026, at least 40% of non-executive directors should be women. On this chart, we can see progress has been made between 2015 and 2020. In the whole of Europe, it went from 22% to 29%. In Belgium, there has been a quota since 2011. It's a law that 1/3 of the seats on the boards of directors should be women. Legislation focuses on corporate decision-making with greater social impact.
For Latin America, we can clearly see that the percentage of women on boards are much lower than in the European countries, and that in 4 of the biggest 5 economies, near half or sometimes more than half of the public companies do not have a woman on his board. If we focus only on Chile, we can notice that there are no quotas for companies regarding the inclusion of women on boards, and because of that, the presence of women is only 12.7%, and only 2.7% of the companies have more than 3 of them. So, due to this reality, the government is preparing the presentation of a bill to establish the same legislations that they established in Norway in the 2008.
Arguments for this legislation. Firstly, companies with more women in the board positions score better on values such as leadership, purpose, accountability, innovation, external orientation, and motivation. Secondly, Goldman Sachs shows that more women at the top yields better financial performance. Thirdly, about 25 more women than men complete higher education. Women provide a broader spectrum of skills and a more holistic vision. Lastly, diversity in decision-making influences the quality of decision-making. Women therefore ensure better decision-making as well as complementarity for skills, experience, and knowledge.
So we've covered arguments for legislation, but what are the main arguments discussed against this issue? First of all, when the gender gap of directors is brought closer together, women are given preference over men in the choice of directorship. This results in harming fair opportunities for all. Secondly, mandatory legislation implies that people are assigned to directorship because of their gender, not because of their qualifications. More qualified people thus miss out. A last point to be made is that legislation for more women on the directors board cannot be respected in the company, which may lead to distortionary behavior. Workers don't want to offer the same quality of work when a fourth person sits on the directorship of the company.
Well, we see a big difference between Latin America and Europe when it comes to the positions held by women in senior management. In Europe, there is a quota, but in Latin America, only a few countries have a quota.
In our opinion, maybe the main reason for such a big difference is how developed the countries are and the problems that they are facing. Probably the European countries can be ahead on this topic because the Latin American economies are still facing problems like quality education, health, security, corruption, and poverty. So therefore, the Latin American countries must first fix these main problems, and then we can take a step forward in terms of gender quotas.
We can conclude that although many countries are already committed to more representation of women on the directors board, the worldwide differences are still very large. This was our presentation. Thank you for listening.